Over $250 billion poured into AI last year. 95% of it generated zero measurable profit. But the layoffs never slowed, and over 1 million jobs were cut in 2025 alone, while the World Economic Forum warns 92 million more will vanish by the decade's end. And the $1 trillion needed to retrain those workers simply does not exist. The economy is not gradually adjusting to artificial intelligence. It is collapsing under the weight of a bet that is enriching a handful of companies, while destabilizing everyone else. And the full scale of this mismatch is only now becoming clear. The World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report lays out the scale of disruption in unflinching terms. By 2030, 170 million new jobs are projected to be created worldwide, but 92 million existing jobs will disappear. That net gain, 78 million roles, hides a deeper problem. The skills required for the jobs being created are not the ones most workers have today. According to the World Economic Forum's own survey of over 12,000 executives across 45 economies, nearly 60% of the global workforce will need some form of reskilling by the end of the decade. Yet there is no public budget or coordinated plan to meet this need. The estimated price tag to retrain and redeploy these workers is staggering. Policy analysts and international agencies put the global reskilling bill at roughly $1 trillion. But there is no evidence that governments or the private sector have committed even a fraction of that sum. Instead, the funding gap persists, leaving millions at risk of being stranded without the skills required to compete for new roles. The World Economic Forum methodology combines macroeconomic modeling, direct employer surveys, and occupation-by-occupation skill mapping to reach its headline figures. But even these numbers may understate the scale of the challenge, as they rely on company projections and scenario modeling, tools that often miss the speed and depth of real-world shocks. The mismatch is not just a matter of numbers. For every new job in advanced manufacturing, data analysis, or renewable energy, there are several jobs in logistics, clerical work, or customer service that are vanishing, roles that often cannot be filled by the same people without months or years of retraining. The result is a widening skills chasm. The World Economic Forum report warns that without urgent and massive investment, the world will face a generation of displaced workers who lack both the means and the opportunity to adapt. The $1 trillion shortfall is not just a budgetary oversight. It is the measure of a system that has prioritized technological acceleration over human resilience. The consequences are already visible in layoffs, stalled career paths, and the growing sense of fear among workers who see the future closing in faster than they can keep up. Corporate investment in artificial intelligence has reached staggering levels, yet the money is not flowing where most people might expect. In 2024 alone, more than $250 billion was funneled into AI, not by governments or public agencies, but almost entirely by private capital. The breakdown tells a story of priorities and power. Venture capital poured $57 billion into AI startups, according to Crunchbase, with most of that money chasing the next generative AI platform or infrastructure tool. These are bets not on broad social benefit, but on finding the next monopoly. The largest slice of spending comes from the tech giants themselves. Cloud providers, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google collectively invested $120 billion in new data centers, custom AI chips, and the high-voltage infrastructure needed to train and run massive models. This spending is not about hiring more workers. It is about building the physical backbone for AI services that can scale globally with minimal human oversight. Enterprise capital expenditures add another $150 billion to the ledger. Large companies are buying on-premise GPUs, specialized storage, and edge computing hardware. They are signing long-term software contracts and hiring consultants to automate business processes. But the bulk of this spending is directed at efficiency gains and cost-cutting, not at expanding payrolls or creating new opportunities for workers. The numbers are hard to ignore. More than $250 billion in a single year. And the majority of it is locked up in infrastructure, software licenses, and speculative bets on future automation. Public investment in reskilling or worker transition barely registers by comparison. The flood of capital reveals who holds the levers in this new economy. and whose needs are being sidelined. The next question is whether this investment is producing the returns that were promised, or simply inflating the next speculative bubble. The numbers on corporate AI spending have become a kind of spectacle. Year after year, companies announce bigger investments, hundreds of billions poured into data centers, custom chips, and software contracts. But beneath the surface, a different story is playing out. A recent MIT survey of 300 public AI projects found that 95% produced zero measurable profit, not a rounding error. Zero. The study covered a broad mix of industries, from finance to manufacturing to retail, and the pattern held across the board. Firms spent on infrastructure, hired consultants, rolled out automation pilots, yet when pressed for bottom-line results, almost none could point to a clear financial gain. Executives often blame the lack of results on measurement problems. Some say they cannot isolate the impact of AI from other business changes. Others admit they simply do not have the tools to track whether these massive investments are paying off. The MIT researchers called this a measurement opacity problem. In practice, it means that even as companies race to automate, they are flying blind, unable to prove that all this spending is making them more profitable or even more efficient. The gap between investment and return is more than a technical glitch. It raises the question of who actually benefits from this wave of automation. If almost all the profit is missing, what justifies the layoffs, the shrinking payrolls, and the promises made to shareholders? The risk is that AI spending is becoming its own self-justifying cycle. Money spent to keep up with rivals, not to create real value. For workers and recent graduates, the result is a system that demands more skills and flexibility, yet offers fewer stable jobs and less security. At the macro level, this disconnect sets off alarm bells for global institutions, who warn that the economy is being reshaped not by shared prosperity, but by a speculative rush that leaves most people behind. The alarm is no longer coming just from think tanks or industry insiders. At the India AI Impact Summit, in 2026, IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva issued a blunt warning. Artificial intelligence is not a distant threat, but a tsunami already reshaping the global labor market. Her words landed with the force of a policy emergency. According to the IMF, up to 60% of jobs in advanced economies are now exposed to automation or radical transformation by AI. Globally, about 40% of the workforce stands in the path of this disruption. Georgieva did not mince words. She called on governments to wake up and prepare for the scale of change now underway. The IMF's exposure metric is not a vague forecast. It is a direct calculation of jobs that could be either replaced or fundamentally altered by AI-driven processes. For workers in sectors ranging from finance to healthcare to logistics, the risk is not just theoretical. The IMF's numbers translate into tens of millions of jobs facing uncertainty, and millions more forced into rapid reskilling or lower wage roles. This is not a warning about efficiency gains or streamlined business operations. The stakes are societal. When an institution as conservative as the IMF describes AI as a tsunami, it signals a crisis that cannot be contained within corporate boardrooms or tech campuses. The exposure figure, 60% of jobs in wealthy nations, means that disruption will not be limited to factory floors or call centers. White-collar professionals, mid-level managers, and recent graduates are all in the blast radius. The IMF's intervention sets the tone for what follows: a global economy where the speed and scale of AI adoption outpace the safety nets and retraining systems that might cushion the blow. The urgency is clear. Without coordinated action, the world faces a labor shock that could leave millions stranded economically, socially, and politically. In 2025, the headlines told only part of the story. The layoff wave that swept across the economy left 1.17 million people without jobs in the United States alone. Of those, nearly 55,000 cuts were directly linked to artificial intelligence. Roles eliminated not by market collapse, but by new software and automation rolled out in the name of progress. Amazon announced 15,000 job cuts, many in logistics and support, citing AI-powered systems that could handle inventory and customer queries around the clock. Salesforce let go of 4,000 employees, with executives pointing to automation in sales operations and customer service. At Workday, 1,750 positions vanished as the company shifted more of its finance and HR functions to AI-driven platforms. Behind these figures are real people, each facing a different kind of economic shock. Maria, a warehouse support worker in Ohio, had been with Amazon for 8 years. She was told her role would be replaced by a new logistics AI, with no retraining offered. For her, the promise of efficiency meant the end of steady income and health benefits. In California, Daniel, a mid-career AI engineer at Salesforce, found himself on the wrong side of the automation curve, his team's own code now doing the work that once filled his days. He was handed a severance package, but no clear path forward, as job postings for similar roles shrank by the week. Then there is Aisha, a recent college graduate who landed her first job at Workday just months before the layoffs. She watched her entry-level position disappear before she could even finish onboarding, joining thousands of young workers struggling to find a foothold in a market where the bottom rung is being sawed off. The layoff numbers are more than a statistic. They are the frontline evidence of a labor market being restructured by corporate AI adoption. Each announcement is another signal that the traditional career ladder is breaking down, replaced by a system that rewards capital and code over human effort. For workers, engineers, and new graduates alike, the promise of technological progress has become a source of anxiety, not security. The bottom rung of the career ladder is giving way. According to Signal Fire, entry-level hiring across core business roles has dropped by 50% since 2019. For young people and new graduates, the numbers are even more stark. In 2025, 52% of college graduates found themselves underemployed, working jobs that do not require their degree or offer a path forward. Youth unemployment for ages 20 to 24 jumped to 9.5%, nearly double the national average. The story is not just about those without a diploma. Even in the heart of the tech sector, the supposed engine of the new economy, opportunity is evaporating. Tech companies announced 77,999 job cuts in the first half of 2025 alone. At the same time, the number of new entry-level tech postings collapsed by 58%, falling from over 13,000 in 2024 to just 5,510 in 2025. The irony is sharp. AI was supposed to create new avenues for skilled workers, but the very engineers who helped build these systems are now being swept aside by them. Dario Amodei, chief executive officer of Anthropic, warned that even the most advanced AI companies will need fewer engineers as automation takes over the core work of coding and model training. Laid-off AI engineers describe a market where the jobs that do appear demand ever more specialized skills, or are temporary contracts with no benefits. For an entire generation, the promise of progress has turned into a bottleneck. The collapse of entry-level hiring blocks the traditional route into stable employment, while the shrinking pool of tech roles exposes the limits of retraining and upskilling as a universal fix. These broken ladders are not just a side effect. They signal a system that is closing off opportunity for those without capital or legacy connections. The result is a growing divide between those who own the technology and those left scrambling for a foothold. Just 5% of tasks can be fully automated by today's AI, according to Darren Ekamoglu's research. The rest, whether too complex or too human, remain largely untouched. Yet even this narrow band of automation is enough to tilt the balance. As companies hand off routine work to machines, the rewards flow to those who own the technology, while workers are left with a shrinking slice of the labor market. The numbers are stark. The OECD predicts wage inequality in advanced economies will rise by 12 to 15% by 2030, driven by AI adoption. Brookings forecasts a 4 to 5 point jump in the Gini coefficient if current trends hold. These projections are grounded in wage data, mapped against the spread of automation and the shifting mix of tasks within firms. The mechanics are straightforward. When AI takes over routine roles, the value of those jobs collapses. Workers in these positions see stagnant or falling wages, while those with the skills to build or manage AI systems pull further ahead. David Otter's research shows the earnings gap between the top 10% and the median worker can widen by up to 15% in sectors most exposed to AI. Meanwhile, capital owners, shareholders, and executives see their share grow even faster. A recent NBER study found that every 10% increase in AI spending raises profit margins by 0.8%, while average employee compensation rises by just 0.2%. Christine Lagarde, president of the European Central Bank, warns that AI's rewards increasingly go to those who control not only the technology, but also the vast data and energy resources behind it. The result is a market where power and profit concentrate at the top, while risk and loss spread below. This is the K-shaped economy. Capital, data, and code rise, while millions face jobs redefined or erased. Across finance, logistics, healthcare, and retail, the profit-wage gap widens, and the social contract that once linked productivity to rising wages unravels. Fraud has surged in the shadows of the economic disruption caused by artificial intelligence. Deloitte projects $1.1 billion in AI-enabled fraud losses for 2025, with 82% of phishing attacks now generated by artificial intelligence. The speed and sophistication of these scams have outpaced traditional defenses, driving losses up by 40% year over year. By 2027, total AI-enabled fraud is forecast to reach $40 billion, a figure that dwarfs the capacity of most banks, businesses, and law enforcement agencies to respond. The safety net is fraying at the same time. Unemployment insurance in the US replaces less than half of a worker's average weekly wage, and only for 26 weeks. In 2025, more than a quarter of the 4 million job seekers had already been out of work for longer than that. The benefits system was built for short, cyclical downturns, not for a wave of permanent, AI-driven displacement. With federal budget cuts tightening access to Medicaid and food assistance, millions are left exposed just as the need for support reaches new highs. Even the headline economic numbers are under dispute. In early 2025, a claim circulated that half of U.S. gross domestic product growth in the first half of the year came from AI infrastructure spending. Critics, including Nobel laureate Daron Acemoglu, warn that this growth is more speculative than real, driven by capital outlays for data centers and chips, not by increased productivity or new jobs. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported a data disruption that left policymakers flying blind on the true scope of labor market change. The regulatory landscape is just as chaotic. The Department of Justice, armed with a 2023 executive order, is suing states like California and New York for passing their own AI regulations, arguing that only the federal government can set the rules. With no comprehensive federal law on AI and no unified plan for displaced workers, the U.S. response is fragmented and reactive. For Maria, Daniel, and Aisha, the warehouse worker, the laid-off engineer, and the recent graduate, there is no clear path to recovery. The system is not just unprepared, it is actively falling behind. Fraudsters exploit new tools, the safety net shrinks, and the official numbers cannot be trusted. The result is a cascade of risks that reach far beyond the workplace, eroding trust in both markets and institutions. The economy is not just being automated, it is being destabilized, with millions left to navigate the fallout alone. Today, the numbers are impossible to ignore. Record AI investment, soaring layoffs, and entire career paths vanishing. The IMF calls this an economic tsunami, but leaders still debate, and protections lag behind. For millions, the gap between corporate efficiency and human survival grows wider every quarter. This isn't a distant scenario. It's a crisis unfolding in real time. The question is who gets rescued and who gets left behind.